Welcome, everyone. We are so happy this evening to see all of you here. And also, Richard and I are delighted to invite to this studio talk our dear friend and fellow practitioner, Alejandro Chaoul, who we have known for many, many years in different circumstances, and our paths keep crossing, and our work together is growing. So we want to share his incredible knowledge with you because it has really inspired us. And before we even begin, part of what we wanted to show you is his brand new book called Tibetan Yoga. And it is magical movements of body, breath, and mind. And that's sort of going to be the container for what we begin to talk about this evening. And then we'll, at the end, have time for questions. And we hope it'll be a lively evening for everyone, or morning for some of you who are in Asia. So just a very brief little bit, Alejandro is someone we've worked with when we did a cancer caregiving and survivors symposium here in Boulder a number of years back. And he worked with sound healing at MD Anderson Cancer Institute in Texas. And that's something that we'll talk about at the end of this program. But to just give him a very brief introduction, he is someone who has devoted his life to practicing and studying and learning. And Alejandro, I just wanted to turn it over to you and say, how did you get into studying Tibetan practices? I know you grew up in
this lifetime.
Yeah, this lifetime in Argentina. And if you could just tell us what inspired you and a little bit about your path.
Sure. First, thank you. It's so nice to be with you in this setting. Although it was nicer to be in person, but it's nice anyway, and happy to see so many people. Welcome and hello to all. Some I know, some I don't. So hello. So yes, I grew up in Argentina. In a which is a very Catholic country, and I grew up in a Jewish family and went to a Presbyterian school, and so of course became interested in Buddhism. So partly, really, it was a search. It was I was going through what I would call existential attacks, which meant at that time for me that I would be many times in bed and would wake up suddenly sweating and feeling I'm going to die, and then what? And it would happen to me often. I was around 7, 8 years old. It would also happen to me in movie theaters, actually, I guess in places that was dark enough to wake internally up. And I asked my parents and the rabbi, and I didn't really get much of answers that I could understand. And suddenly I remember who was kind enough to bring a book to me that was called Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. Maybe many of you have read it. And part of it, which I didn't even know that it was the story of Buddha Shakyamuni, but part of it, what was really impacting to me was this aspect that was talking about these sufferings of birth, old age, sickness, and death. And that clicked immediately. And so I started searching, and through the uncle of a friend of mine, I started meditating, first with the transcendental meditation. And then as I then was interested more in Eastern religions, actually, before that, I came to the U.S. to study advertising, but that put me in touch with a lot of people, particularly from India. And so when I graduated, I went to India, and I spent what I thought was going to be a couple of months. I spent almost a year, and that's really when I was looking for a teacher, or at the beginning, it was Hindu teacher, and I met a wonderful teacher called Swami Chinmayanandaji. But then really, as I was walking through Ladakh, which is where India makes like a little mushroom on top, I met a lot of Buddhist Tibetans in different monasteries that they were very kind to host me and give me shelter and food for a few days as I continue walking through that part of the Himalayas. And one of the days after actually a Hindu pilgrimage, I met with these Muslim people that hosted me in a place called Pampur, where they grow saffron. And we biked back to Srinagar. And in the newspaper, there was this story that said the Dalai Lama had been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So this is 1998, right? 1989. And so as I see that, I'm so happy, like if it was my father or my mother who got the Nobel Prize. And I decided I need to meet this man. I had seen his photo in so many of the monasteries. I went to Dharamsala and I got to meet him in a big conference or event he was doing at the Tibetan Children Village. And besides his presence that I couldn't capture in any of the 36 photos that I took because I was kind of trembling so much that nothing came out. His smile and his presence and the people, how they were opening to him. And at the end, these kids that were performing, kind of, they were all in white and curled and said, at the end, it said, others before self. And it touched me in such a way that I said, there's something here that I want to go deep into. And I was able, of course, I wanted to study with the Dalai Lama. And when I went to the office, they said, well, you can't. But choose another. There's many lamas here, right? And so I went and I met, actually, I was living in a monastery in Silong Kagiling. And so the lama that was the head lama there, Yeshe Dorje Rinpoche, who happened to be the weatherman for the Dalai Lama, he wasn't there yet. And so when he came, I met him, and I said, this is a path that I want to pursue. And I started with the Nondro, which is the usual fundamental practice. But then as I continued, went back to Argentina and continued practicing, I met Namkhai Nob Rinpoche. And through Namkhai Nob Rinpoche, I heard that there's something called Tibetan yoga. He would call it Yantra Yoga, kind of a Sanskritization of the Tibetan Trungkor. Which means this magical movements or this being in this state of connectedness through this magical yantra, right? And so I really got interested in it. I was able to learn some of that. And it was really interesting because I had already, although I was doing these Buddhist practices, these Tibetan practices, and there were some that incorporated the body, like prostrations. Really, having a yoga practice that was part of what I was already learning was fantastic. And I started being more interested in kind of the academic part of this. And then I came back to the States, and I came to Virginia, and I did my master's there. As I was doing that, I started looking into text, and I met Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, who was the student of someone who I met before, Lopon Tenzin Namdak. And for those who don't know these people, let me just maybe share some images. So this is the wonderful Lopon Tenzin Namdak, whom I dedicate the book to. And he's now 96 years old. I was able to be in his 95th birthday before COVID hit us in Nepal. And it was at his monastery in the early 90s where I learned this Trungkor. And it was wonderful to be able to learn it in that monastery under his and Khenpo Nima Wangyal's supervision. And, it was interesting because the way of learning that, and I had learned some yoga and Tai Chi in the West, this was so different. In 3 days, this young monk, we did it, there was no mats. It was like, what do you call, cement floor. And we did all these movements that had jumps, and we fell back on our, butt. And, so anyways, a lot of different practices, but it was a great start. And then I went to Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, and I said that I had learned this, and he said, let's go over the text. And so just for those of you who don't know, these are some of the texts. So this is specifically the text that I work with. And this is a text by Shartsa Rinpoche, and it's from the oral tradition of Shangshung, which is this Tibetan yoga. And oral, so there's aural and oral, right? So aural means that it's heard, because this tradition was originally done teacher to disciple through a bamboo stick. So this is how you hear it, and so it's very protected, and you hear it all. And so it was really important, this teacher to student. And it was really beautiful to be with Rinpoche and be able to go over what I had learned in Nepal. And so I continued studying with Rinpoche, and that led me to, now being 30 years studying with him. And that's Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. For those of you who don't know him, I think most of you might know him. And so studying with him, this is actually at the 25th anniversary of his institute, Ligmincha. And so I've been with him for all that time. And he continues to be, someone that is my main teacher with him and Lopon. And so for me, that tradition is really important. If you see the tanka in the back, that's one of our main deities, Kapiritsa, and in the bottom is Lopon. So all to say, this is a tradition that comes from an ancient text, both oral tradition, written tradition, and now is still very alive. And so after studying it and practicing both academically and in practice, Rinpoche asked me to start teaching it. So that's a long way of saying that's how I got. And I got smitten by it. I love this practice. I do it every day, and it's just like so inspiring.
Yeah. And so in terms of the practices, one of the things that Richard and I love about looking through the book and seeing some of the names of the postures, and there are these fanciful names of postures, like I wrote a couple of them down, like the peacock shaking off water, which Richard does, a peacock who swallowed a snake, so they might do some sort of dance together, or the female donkey lying down sideways. And there's such a vividness, even in the titles of them. And we were wondering, because in Ashtanga Yoga, breath is such an important part of the practice, as it is in your practice, how does that interface? Go ahead.
Yeah, what does... so when we talk about breath, we're talking on different levels, and like there's actually the air that goes in and out. But I know that in these traditions, that breath is actually referring to prana, which is all through and beyond the body, sensation. Just the pure, raw sensation of breath, and the emphasis is just amazing in many traditions, but here it's really unavoidable to see. And so I was just wondering, what are the the different levels of breath, and then how does the breath relate then to the subtle mind or the subtle body, and everything that might arise as mind or experience.
And to the movements. How does the
Oh,
breath?
and to the movements, yeah, because then we think, oh, the body is not important, and I'm just going to breathe, and
Yeah. So let's see where I start. So let's start with breath. So breath, in a way, is the link between mind and body, right? So it's really that interconnection. And one of the things that these practices teach us is that we connect through something that we call the subtle body. And as in Indian yoga that you talk about the nadis, we talk about sa, and this is one of the X-rays of our body, and so again, there's many different ones. I'm not saying, I know in some traditions the channels cross, in some others they don't. So there's different ways of, I think our body has all of them, and depending what practice we're doing, what lights up and what we use. But really these channels or nadis, this tsa, are ways where our mind can guide the breath through them, right? And as they receive that breath, they almost feel that sense of expanding, guiding into the right area, particular chakras, and then the movement expands that area, allowing that area to liberate whatever is stuck. And particularly the way that we do it in Trungkor is that we inhale and hold. And not all holdings are bandhas, so not all are strong retentions. Many are really light retentions. And particularly in this text, we work with what we call the pervasive breath or chaplung, which means that you breathe into the central channel and hold it lightly. We call it maninglung or neutral breath, which allows you to, the breath, which is wind, even from the subtle level, to expand throughout from the central channel to the rest of the body as you then do whatever movement. So every movement is like a mandala. The Tibetan word for mandala, gilkor, means center and periphery. So you enter into your center and expand, do whatever movement that you do, and then what you do is you shake. You shake because what you're doing is you're stirring from the depth of samsara, so it's not just your own stuff, but it's that of all beings. And then you exhale, not only through the nose, but through the mouth with this specific sounds. One is ha, which is just a sense of release of the breath. Ha. And then a very strong sound, which is pe. And pe is a cutting sound. And it's not just to release the stale breath, but also, if your mind is wandering, pe, for a moment, you cut that and then rest. And this is really the most important part. So the movement, the breath is really important in what we call, it's almost like in the Tantra, the generation state. And then after the pe is that dissolution state. You're back into that center, into that natural state of mind. Many times in our tradition, we call it the ah state of mind. And that's why I had this shirt, that ah sound. And so it's about resting. So all these movements are really creating the right conditions to get to all our stuff, which actually I love the name in Tibetan, geksel, gek. Gek are obstacles that could be physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and sel means clearing. So this geksel, clearing all those geks, so then you can rest. And what's beautiful about it is that when, as I said, we are shaking and then releasing, so that means that you're not just releasing your own stuff, but it's that of all beings. And so as you release and rest, is like what the text says, you feel like everyone is a Buddha. And if you are not Buddhist and you don't like the word Buddha, everyone is light beings. So, now you've helped through your intention to clear the obstacles of everyone. No matter if they think like you or not think like you, you're helping. This is the intention with which we do the practices. And so when we do practices, the movements as you were naming them, like, like the peacock drinking water, so what you do is you're breathing in and holding, and then you're kind of going down. In this case, you feel like a peacock, and you go down and drink, and then as you go up, you're a little kind of making sure, a little paranoid, they say, that the peacock is. So you look one side, you look the other side, and then you drink, and then you do the movement again. So each movement kind of represents a little bit. You embody that for a moment as you do that practices, holding the breath in that light manner. So then when you exhale, you're back in that resting.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I like the holding in the light manner, because that really, I think that lightness is kind of the big secret, because it's like, because if sometimes, we'll be doing practices, but I try really hard, and I think, well, I've got to get this, so I'm going to hold my breath until, I have an explosion somewhere, but most of that's, when the ego takes over, like, I've got to do this. It's part of some story that I'm excluding from the practice, and but that light holding somehow, is like the heart opening. How to do a rigorous practice, but with the heart open, so that it's not like I'm trying to create something that I can, take selfies with, though I might,
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that, Richard, because, that is so important. And, as, we get into these practices and, many of us, and maybe when we are younger, we think of, I want to do this, it's almost like a yoga competition, right? Can you do this posture? Can you do this? Can you hold it enough? And we really learn that actually that might hurt yourself. And so the being light is actually what opens you up. And it's not about pushing, it's about allowing. And so it's about really learning and training. And so, for example, eventually there are parts that are strong and rough, but you don't start there. By the time you get there, you need to maintain the lightness that you were mentioning all throughout. So, for example, when we do certain retentions, we start with something that we call jamlum, and jam in Tibetan is like soft. And as Tenzin Rinpoche remind me, it's like soft is not just that the retention is soft, your whole being is soft. So when you were saying that softness, that's what it reminded me, this lightness, this softness. And as you do this breathing over and over and over again, eventually trying to reach 108 breath, then, you train into the barlum, or the medium kind of breath. And again, you train, and can you be in that without losing the lightness? And then we get into the draklung, into the rough breath. And again, can we still stay there? Because at the end is coming back to that same state of mind of being able to be relaxed and aware. So thank you for mentioning that lightness.
Yeah, and it seems that it is this paradoxical state of intensity and softness that really, as you speak of in the book, that it is, the intention of these practices is to, practice in such a way that perhaps there are moments of liberation. And in those moments, and then by taking those moments, we have the insight to see our connectedness to others. And that becomes what is important, is how we are then. I love the way you were saying that, you just feel the practices are being offered as something to others. and with that intensity and the softness.
Yeah, and you'd also mentioned yantra. I forget what the Tibetan word was. Yantra yoga, mantra yoga,
Chul, you know,
tantra
yeah.
yoga.
So when you have chul core, which means this magical movement, that's what the word, yantra is both kind of this, it could be as a diagram, but there's different ways of, kind of looking at or talking about yantra, but the body is like a yantra. It's
The
like
body and so in the yantra, it's like it includes the whole body. So it's not just like, oh, only the middle of my heart is sacred because, but it's like, your bones and your fingernails and your skin and even, everything that somehow has to be included in that vision of the yantra. And
and as you say, the skin actually, at the end, when you exhale, of course you're exhaling through the nose, but you feel you exhale through every pore. And a little bit, Mary, like what you're saying, the sense of the giving to all beings, so it's way beyond yourself. As Richard, as you were saying earlier, that the subtleness of the breath, it doesn't just stay within the body. That's why it's this pervasive aspect, and it's a beautiful quality that we train in. And so that's part of the practice itself. And the body, the breath, and the mind kind of dance, together to learn how we put it all together. And interesting enough, in this practice, we need to tame the mind first, then do the breath, and then start doing the movements. Because otherwise, and a lot of people just get into, I just want to learn more movements, as if by learning more movements, you learn more. But, just the movements, if you just think of the movements themselves as being the practice, as Ponlo Tinlanima, who's the main teacher of Menri Monastery, would say, it's like children playing. It's fun, because you do this and you jump and hop. But if you don't connect, if you haven't done the meditation and the breathing before, it doesn't have as much meaning. I mean, it's still fun, but it's not the same. So partly what brings that meaning, what brings that sense of practice is really that, that you train slowly and you don't need to hurry up. Actually, as I see some of people who have studied with me know, my favorite word is kale kale, which means slowly, slowly. It's not about learning everything at once. It's about learning, deepening, and, Mary, when you were saying about, this kind of paradox, it is a little bit because all these movements, it's really about learning how to sit.
Yeah.
So we do the movement so that then we can sit. And when I say sit here, I don't mean just physically. I mean sitting really deeply, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. What Tenzin Rinpoche would say, it's that stillness that is the doorway to our spaciousness. Mm-hmm. So that's really what the practice is about. And every movement is one other opportunity to get it. And if we don't, we have another one, right? Sometimes I say, when, even when you do it a little rougher, you finish every movement, ha, pet, and then you stay, and again, ha, pet. It's almost like being slapped, right? It's like, did you get it? Pa! If you didn't get this one, get this one. Ha, pet. So finally, at some point, hopefully, you get it, and some of the movements are easier for you to get it, and then you stay with that. So I think that's part of the beauty that I see in them.
So okay, go ahead.
Oh, that word pet, or in Brahminical Sanskrit, pat.
Right.
If it's a labial, aspirated, and what's kind of fun and is at any time you stop exhaling, even if you haven't got to the deep exhale, if you just go, it makes your pelvic floor contract. You can't help it. If you get the, if you do it with and that's, for the kind of esoteric central channel yoga, that's like a huge thing, because a lot of people, they just have no idea. Like, what do you mean by the pelvic floor or that secret area? And but I think just that magic mantra does, and then you can say, and
Yeah. So putting it in the chat, because maybe some people don't know. So you're totally right. So the word pe, so in Sanskrit and Tibetan, most of these consonants have, like for example, pa, pa, ba, right? So this is that pa, as you were saying, Rich, that aspirated pa. And with the T, it's like pe, right? And so the T, what it does, it makes it that that it cuts it, right? It's at the end. So it's not like pe, it's
yeah.
And so that also supports that lifting of the, as you say, of the perineum. And what it does too is that, as you said, every part of the body is included. And I think a lot of times it's spiritual practice. We only think from here up, like we think this is the spiritual part, and all what's down there, we don't want to mess with, But here, it's all part of the mandala, right? So, and some practices move you more this part of the mandala, some practices move you this other part. And at the end, it's all about opening so that lung, that prana, circulates through those areas and opens those nadis, those channels, so we can liberate, as Mary was saying, right? So that's really the most beautiful part of the practice.
Yeah, and I was wondering, and it's probably in the book, and I have probably missed it, but with the practices, taking them slowly, which when you were saying slowly, slowly, this is one of our mantras also, which is wonderful to hear you saying that, because there is always, we run into, even within ourselves, this urge to just, get it, go through. But with this practice, how long would one practice during a particular day when you have been trained in it? And one of the things we talked about, we were fortunate enough to have lunch with Alejandro just the other day, and we were talking about some of this, and just the idea that you don't leap in and get, as much as it's wonderful to have this book, you can't really use this as the sole resource for learning these practices. Like with yoga or pranayama in particular, you need a teacher to be there teaching you. And how does that progress? Like you were talking about the young monk doing all kinds of things with you. Do you do it? Does one learn like all of the postures at once? And when you practice on a daily basis, do you practice for a certain amount of time, or many practices, or particular things that are relevant for particular obstacles you happen to notice within yourself? How does that work?
So that's a great question. And so, sometimes you learn according to the circumstance that you're in. So, for example, in this case, this monk was there, and he decided to teach us in 3 days this whole thing. But that didn't mean that I learned it, right? That meant that the seed was planted. And that then I would go to the book. In that case, it was this, right? The Tibetan text, which I've translated in the back. And so, usually books in the lineage and the tradition that I practice are useful once you learn. I think I shared with you when Lopun, the teacher I was sharing at the beginning, when his first book in English came, he was shocked that people were just taking it out of the shelves and trying to practice, he said, oh, that was not the point, right? Because first you get the instructions, the transmission, then you read the book as a support. So partly it's a manual, but not to learn from, but to use along what you're receiving from a teacher. And so I think that's really, really important. I know, actually, someone in a review of my book said, there's no pictures, and, I can't learn from this book. And that is true. It's the idea is not to just read it and start doing it. It's to start for some of you, yes, because some of you have learned it. And so for you, this is what it is. Others, you might try it and then say, okay, this is something that I'm interested in. Let me see where they're teaching it and go to that. In fact, we were talking this morning with Rob that I see here in the audience too. And, as we are planning how, we do these retreats in Ligmincha, how we put them together. So, okay, there's this body of practices, right? In this case, there's 39 movements. How do we teach them, right? So usually we do teach them kale kale. I don't follow anymore the recipe which I was given by this monk of trying to do everything in a weekend. Although I do have to say that I did try. And when I did that at the beginning, people were like, enough, and then what happened was, when I asked them a month later, how are you doing with the practice? They said, I haven't started. I don't know where to start from. So it's overwhelming. Mm-hmm. So it's better to give something that you then practice and then you continue. So there's different ways also of, so once, you learn what you learn, you start practicing every day. And there's a couple of ways of practicing. So I'll share two ways that I've been using them. So one is, you just focus on that, which is, okay, I'm going to do my Tibetan yoga practice. The other is, as I learned it in Nepal, after learning all that, the way that we practice them, and I was able to stay in the monastery for over a month in that case, practicing with the monks in the morning and the evening. And so what we did was, as we sat and did, always we start with some prayers and this intention of doing this for all beings, and then we rest, trying to rest in what they call the natural state, and just staying there. And then after a while, even the most practitioners, we can't really stay fresh. And so either we go into an agitated mind or into a dull mind, and that's the time that the umze, the person who's guiding the practice, would say, now, and he would do a series of this, would do one set of these movements. And we would all do them because, you knew them. And so you would go, we would do one, hop head, the other one, And then after we did those 5 or 6 movements, you sit again and continue for another 20, 30 minutes. And then you close with a sense of dedicating the practice, whatever benefits I gathered, may they be for all beings. And so in that way, you bring the practice that you can continue with your other practices. So you're doing, whether you're doing your non-draw, whether you're doing, whatever practice that you're doing, that once, particularly when you have more gets, you want to telwa. You want to clear them, right? And that's why this is so important. And so that's another way of practicing that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And in the book, you actually list, you have some of those charts that talk about the different obstacles and the different practices in relation to obstacles, which seems quite helpful to be able to see them in that manner. And I have one more question, which is about visualization, which I know we do a lot of visualization in the yoga that we teach, but it is less common in some of the Indian practices or some of the yoga practices, especially modern yoga practices.
Modern yoga practices.
Yeah. And how that relates and plays a role these practices, and maybe if not even in these practices, in your sort of experience of integrating these practices into life?
So there's a number of different visualizations, and some are even what, and I don't know, it's interesting because the word visualization is it's a little problematic, I find sometimes, because we talk about visualizations, but it's not really visualizations, right? It's kind of internal, right? And so it's like this sense of, it's more about the mind than the eyes, right? And so even though in Tibetan the word is mikpa, which means kind of with the eyes, but it's this internal. And so there's part of it that it's even visualizing or connecting to the emptiness, the spaciousness of your body, the spaciousness of your channel, right? And then there's practices where you would guide the breath, maybe visualizing it as green light through these channels. And then there's practices where you visualize syllables, or you visualize an arrow going through your central channel and cleaning. There's different practices where there are visualizations. And also, as you mentioned at the beginning, with sound, the sound, so each of the sounds that we do, sometimes they have, as I was mentioning, the ah here, usually we visualize it white, the om, we visualize it red, the hong, we visualize it blue. And so what the visualization, one of the main aspects of it is, we call it the protectors of the mind, which means it supports the mind for not being distracted. So sometimes, let's say the breath, right? So many times, in our practices, focus on the breath. And I hear people saying, what does that mean, right? Some people, it's not easy to focus on the breath or the sensation or the texture of the breath. So bringing a visualization, it's like, oh, yeah, that I can do. For other people, it's the opposite. I can't visualize, but I can feel. So I think it's giving us tools to support how different people learn. And so for some people, it's learning through the movements. For some people, it's learning the breathing. Some is the visualization. So what is the doorway in that supports you're able to clear the obstacles and stay in that state of mind? So that's one of the uses I see in the visualizations, but I don't know if it's the same in Ashtanga.
Yeah.
Oh, I think so. It is now. Because everybody's slightly different, not as different as we would like to be, but slightly different. And you're going to find something unique, like, you're visualizing and I think, the visualization, just the word gets so much, oh, I'm seeing this, but also hearing, or touching, and even smelling, and, all of the senses. Sometimes, the metaphor of seeing it likes to dominate. But I was just thinking of, this, in Hatha Yoga, the idea of sound, which is called nada, which actually just means a big river, and a nadi is a little river, or like a little channel, and I think it's that's a different kind of metaphor. Let's listen, let's give complete space to something, just to listen to it, and so I wanted to and I know you work a lot with sound healing, and with cancer patients and things. And
so actually with cancer patients, we have done research both with the Tibetan yoga as well as with sound. And part of what with sound, we do include the visualization of each of these syllables. And also each sound, as you said, they have a vibration. But also what's happening So in different parts of in the auditory part of the brain, there's changes, right? But also what's happening is there's in this particular practice, there's tasks that go along. So for example, in the you say and it's a sense of clearing the clutterness, right? So getting that crystal clear aspect of reconnecting to spaciousness. Because a lot of times we don't see the space because we see the clouds, right? But the space is always there. So sometimes we need to clear some of the clouds to see the space. But if we're able to stay in that space, the sky doesn't say how cloudy I'm today, right? So if you can connect to that spaciousness, then as you say the Om, so the is more here, in the forehead, the Om is in the throat chakra, and here is a sense of completeness. So Om, and so Om is a sense of that completeness and that sense of everything. You cleared everything. Now you can reach your full treasure of all your qualities. In the Tibetan tradition, Om has 5 parts, so the 5 wisdoms. And so then, as you do that, then you come to your heart. And then it's blue home, that it's almost like this laser beam that brings that quality of those 5, from those 5 wisdoms or 5 elements or 5 positive qualities, as Mary was saying from that chart. You can choose, let's say, loving kindness, and now I'm going to, with the home, bring it into a particular situation. And so whether it's, in our regular practice, whether it's people with cancer, what we were doing is that as we're doing this also, because there was a task, in a way, the brain gets involved in such a way that we can clear obstacles of the brain. And so what we were using that for is for something that it's called chemo brain, or the deleterious effects of chemotherapy in the brain. And so, and what we found actually is that it did help, and it improved short-term memory as well as speed cognitive function. So that's just one little aspect of it. But of course, the whole point is that eventually, you can, the Aum Hung is the enlightened aspect of your body, of your breath, and of your mind.
Yeah, that's wonderful work. And you measured, you gathered quite a bit of research on that. You were working with Lorenzo Cohen, yes, on this program.
I worked with Lorenzo for 20 years. We're still good friends, and MD Anderson is still not far from here, so I still do work. Now I do work with their faculty and staff. And yes, in the research with the integrative medicine with Lorenzo, we've done research in the Tibetan yoga, actually using that. And I listed some of that research in the bibliography. So if people are interested, and I did mention it in the last chapter, in the one moving forward, magical movements reach the West, I talk about some of that research and how it's, some of that first study, because that was always the most difficult one. As someone, when I presented it in a conference, actually close to you, I was in Denver, and someone, this was in 2001, and someone said, "How did you get those doctors in Texas to approve that?" Right? So that was the hardest research first, kind of breaking those barriers, and then we even got funding from the NCI, from the National Cancer Institute. So. It's been a nice journey as well that was kind of totally unexpected. And I have to say, Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche has always been incredibly supportive of that research.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah.
Shall we?
Yeah. Do you have, we're aware of time tonight. We don't want to take this too long.
Kali.
And we want to, there's such rich information here, and there's so much that is a parallel to what we all practice within this form of Ashtanga yoga that we practice together, that this just seems fascinating. And as we know, letting it sink in, taking that residue, the time for the residue to really become assimilated, is one of the most important parts of the practice in yoga and in what you're saying, Alejandro.
So do you want me to take, I see one question here, and then maybe we can take other questions?
That sounds great.
Well, actually, I want to say first, I see that Santiago is here, Santiago Durlet. We went to school in Argentina together.
Oh my gosh.
Santi, it's good to see you here. Gusto verte. So the question by David, is Pe the same as the syllables that are used during Poa practice or at the end of life? Yes. Pe is a syllable that is used also in Che, for example, in the Che practice in the Tibetan tradition. It's also used in some of the Poa. Some other Poas use other syllables. But yes, it's the same syllable. It's a very powerful syllable, as Richard was also explaining. And so we will see it in different practices. Yeah. Any
That's
other
great.
questions from the audience? And you can speak up if you want. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Welcome.
I have a question, Alejandro.
Sure,
I'm wondering if during this rather extraordinary time that we've all been navigating, that you have felt a different experience in your personal practice, because you talked about, we do it for our own stuff, but also for others as well. And have you felt any kind of connection to what's going on in the world with your practice?
Sure. Thank you, Susan. Yeah. Sometimes, the focus is we start by doing things for our own part, whether it's, illness or just, existential attacks or anything that we're going through. But then also for someone in particular, others, but also society. So totally, more and more, I think actually the circumstances that we live in a way make even more tangible the clutteredness of society. And I include myself in it. So I'm not saying I'm not part of the clutteredness, right? So, but it's so tangible, that density that sometimes we can't breathe, right? It's so tangible that by doing this practice and being able to come into the center channel, kind of the inner abode, the inner refuge, and be able to hold there and really try and connect to the deepest of intentions, and then really clear, not just for me, but for all beings, even if it's just through that intention, that kale, putting a grain of sand, I think it's really powerful because it empowers me and the practitioner to be able to not feel totally impotent, totally, that we can't do anything. Every practice that we do, as we share the benefits with all beings, it's a way of contributing for, peace and clarity in the world. And so I feel that supports me and any practitioner.
Alejandro, that's a beautiful answer. Thank you. What we want to do is to stop the recording now. And if we might stick around for a few more questions if there are any after that. But before we stop the recording, maybe we could do something to offer the goodness that's come from this, either a chant. This is sort of spontaneous, but maybe if you have something that you offer at the end of your practices that you could do for us and guide us through, that would be beautiful.
So,
Thank you.
So I'm thinking. So usually we do have a prayer, and so I will do that. But because most of you may not know it, I think that before we do it, even though we have, you know, I know that all of you are silenced, and Zoom doesn't allow us to really have the mics on because it becomes, like me singing in the shower. So but let's do 3 ahs together as a way of interconnecting wherever we are and feeling that in the first ah, it's like clearing our stuff. The second ah is clearing everyone else's stuff. And the third ah is bringing that clarity to everyone's heart, to the whole wide world. And then I'll recite a prayer of dedication to empower it. Does that sound like a plan?
It's perfect. Thank you.
So just take a moment so we're not just saying ah, but we're really connecting. Breathing in and out a few times and sitting comfortably wherever you are, in a cushion, a chair, and just finding a sense of centering. Maybe feeling the sits bones and the legs and the feet touching some surface. And straightening so you feel a little bit the space above your crown. So that's like your inner axis mundi reaching all the way to the center of the earth and the sky. And the center of all of it is your heart line. And as we share, continue to always practice with the support of all our teachers, of all our tradition, we'll say ah 3 times. As you let the sound dissolve in silence, breathe into that silence and spaciousness with that subtle vibration. Feeling that as we clear the obstacles of ourselves and all beings, may we share the benefits of the practice as if it was nectar that we pour in the ocean so it's there for everyone and ourselves.
Thank you, Alejandro.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So nice to be with you.